Ethan's pocket money came from his father working double shifts at construction sites and his mother cleaning houses until midnight. The 22-year-old engineering student at Boston University had to stretch every dollar, waiting weeks between his part-time job payments. That Tuesday morning in October, he sat in the campus cafeteria, staring at the crumpled $20 bill in his palm, calculating what he could afford. Coffee, $3. Sandwich, $8. Textbook he desperately needed, 15s. The math was simple, brutal, and familiar. Just then, movement caught his eye. Mrs. Helen, the elderly janitor, approached the nearby tables with her cleaning cart. As she methodically wiped down each surface, Ethan noticed something different. Her usual steady movements seemed slower, more deliberate, and when she turned slightly, he saw it, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Most students barely acknowledged her existence. To them, she was invisible, part of the campus furniture. But Ethan had grown up in a household where his mother cleaned other people's messes for a living. He knew the weight of invisible work, the dignity required to serve others who never saw you. The decision he made with that $20 bill would open a door in his life that he never expected 6 months later. Welcome to Stories Worth Telling. Before we begin this powerful story of compassion, sacrifice, and unexpected miracles, please let us know in the comments which city you're watching us from today, and if you believe stories like these deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us ensure they're never forgotten. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ethan approached Mrs. Helen's cleaning station. She was restocking supplies from a small storage closet, her movements precise, despite her obvious distress. "Excuse me, Mrs. Helen?" She looked up, startled. Few students knew her name. "Yes, dear?" "I was wondering, would you like to join me for coffee? I was about to grab one anyway." Helen's eyes widened. In her 15 years working at Boston University, no student had ever invited her for coffee. "Oh, sweetheart, that's very kind, but I have work to—" "Please," Ethan interrupted gently, "you look like you could use a friend right now." Something in his voice, perhaps the genuine concern, made Helen pause. She glanced around the nearly empty cafeteria, then back at this young man who was offering her something no one ever had, his time. I suppose I could take a quick break." They sat at a corner table, steam rising from their coffee cups. Helen wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic, seeking comfort in its heat. "You don't have to tell me what's wrong," Ethan said softly, "but if you want to talk, I'm here." Helen studied his face. There was an openness there, a maturity that seemed beyond his years. "It's my son Marcus," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been sick for months now. The doctors, they say he needs surgery, but the insurance—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "That must be terrifying." $22,000, Helen continued, as if she hadn't heard him. "That's what they want up front. I've been working here for 15 years, picking up extra shifts, but—" She laughed bitterly. "A janitor's salary doesn't stretch that far." Ethan felt his chest tighten. $22,000 might as well have been $22 million to someone like him, but he knew something about impossible numbers and the weight they carried. "Have you applied for financial assistance? Sometimes hospitals have programs." "I've tried everything," Helen said, her composure finally cracking. "Everything. And now Marcus is getting worse, and I don't know what to do. I can't lose him. He's all I have left." Without thinking, Ethan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You won't lose him. We'll figure something out." Helen looked at him through her tears. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "Because you remind me of my mother," Ethan said simply. "She works 3 jobs to keep me in school. I know what sacrifice looks like." From that day forward, their friendship became a routine. Every morning at 7 a.m. before classes started, Ethan would find Mrs. Helen and they would share coffee. She told him about Marcus, how brilliant he was, how he'd gotten into MIT but had to defer because of his illness, how he dreamed of becoming a doctor himself. Ethan, in turn, shared his own struggles. The shame of wearing the same 3 shirts to class, the nights he went to bed hungry to save money, the way his wealthy classmates talked about spring break trips that cost more than his family made in 6 months. "You're going to be successful," Helen told him one morning, watching him sketch engineering diagrams on napkins because he couldn't afford proper graph paper. "I can see it in you. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," Ethan admitted. "Maybe I should just drop out, get a full-time job, help my parents more." "Don't you dare," Helen said firmly. "Education is the one thing no one can take away from you. Your parents are sacrificing so you can have opportunities they never did. Don't waste that gift." The bond between them grew stronger each day. Ethan began to see past the uniform, past the assumptions people made about cleaning staff. Helen saw past Ethan's worn clothes and financial struggles to the brilliant, compassionate young man underneath. What neither of them knew was that this friendship was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. As weeks passed, Ethan began to notice things. Mrs. Helen's lunch consisted of a single apple and crackers. Her uniform, while clean, was patched in several places. Her shoes were worn thin, but she never complained. When Ethan received his monthly payment from his campus job, $400 that was supposed to last 4 weeks, he made a decision that would have seemed impossible months earlier. He kept $200 for absolute necessities and used the rest for Helen. "I bought too much food," he would lie, bringing her sandwiches. "Can you help me finish this?" "My professor gave me these books, but I already have them," he'd say, handing her medical journals he'd actually bought from other students, thinking they might help her understand Marcus's condition better. The bookstore was throwing these out, he'd claim, presenting her with small gifts: a warm scarf, a thermos for her coffee, a cushion for her break room chair. Helen wasn't fooled, but she was touched beyond words. This young man, who clearly had so little, was sharing what he had with her. It reminded her of someone else, long ago, who had shown her such kindness. The other students began to notice Ethan's behavior. In the cafeteria, in study groups, the whispers followed him. "Why does he hang out with the cleaning lady? It's weird, right? Like, what's his deal? Maybe he's trying to get better grades by sucking up to staff." Ethan's roommate, Brad, finally confronted him. "Dude, what's with you and the janitor? People are starting to talk." "Let them talk," Ethan replied, not looking up from his textbook. "Look, I get that you're trying to be nice or whatever, but you're making yourself look, I don't know, desperate? You're already the scholarship kid. You don't need to make it worse." Ethan closed his book and looked at Brad. Really looked at him. Brad, whose father was a hedge fund manager, who'd never worked a day in his life, who spent more on a night out than Ethan's family spent on groceries in a month. "Her name is Helen," Ethan said quietly. "She has a son who's dying because they can't afford surgery. She works 15-hour days and still finds time to ask about my classes. Maybe if more people talked to her instead of about her, they'd understand what kindness actually looks like." Brad fell silent, perhaps hearing something in Ethan's voice that made him reconsider his words. Meanwhile, Helen was fighting her own battles. Marcus's condition was deteriorating faster than expected. The doctors had moved up his surgery date, but that only meant the financial pressure was mounting. She'd taken on extra shifts, cleaning offices downtown after her university job ended, but it still wasn't enough. She never told Ethan how dire things had become. She couldn't bear to burden this young man who was already giving so much of himself. But Ethan could see the strain in her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed to carry more weight each day. One evening, as Helen was preparing to leave for her second job, Ethan approached her with something in his hand. "Mrs. Helen, I want you to have this." It was an envelope containing $300, money he'd saved by eating nothing but ramen noodles for 2 weeks. "Oh, sweetheart, I can't take this," Helen protested. "It's not charity," Ethan said firmly. "It's what friends do for each other. Besides, you've given me so much more than money. You've given me hope." Helen's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the envelope. That night she cried herself to sleep, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that genuine goodness still existed in the world. 3 months into their friendship, Helen stopped coming to work. Ethan waited at their usual spot, checking his watch as minutes ticked by. When she didn't appear the next day either, he went to the maintenance office. "Mrs. Helen." She called in. "Family emergency," the supervisor said dismissively. "Probably taking care of that sick kid of hers." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Helen would never miss work unless something was terribly wrong. That evening, he did something he'd never done before. He looked up Helen's address in the staff directory. The building was in a neighborhood Ethan recognized, though he'd never visited. It was where his mother sometimes worked, cleaning houses for families who could afford such services. The apartment complex was tired-looking, but maintained, the kind of place where working people lived paycheck to paycheck. He climbed 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3B and knocked softly. When Helen opened the door, Ethan barely recognized her. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her clothes wrinkled as if she'd slept in them. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "You missed coffee," he said simply. "I was worried." Helen's face crumpled. "Oh, sweetheart. Come in. Come in." The apartment was small but immaculate. Family photos covered every surface. A younger Helen with a handsome man in military uniform, graduation pictures, birthday celebrations, and everywhere, images of a young man who looked remarkably like Helen. Marcus. "He collapsed," Helen said, following Ethan's gaze to a recent photo of Marcus. "2 days ago. They've moved him to intensive care. The doctors say if he doesn't have surgery within the week..." Ethan felt helpless. All the small kindnesses he'd shown Helen, all the coffee and conversation, meant nothing in the face of this. He wanted to fix it, to solve it. But how could a student with $73 in his bank account make any real difference? "I've been calling everyone," Helen continued. "Charities, foundations, even tried to set up one of those online fundraising pages. But Marcus isn't a cute kid with a heartbreaking story. He's a 24-year-old man, and people don't care as much about adults who get sick." "How much have you raised so far?" $1,800. It's not even close to enough. Ethan thought about his own savings, the $300 he'd been carefully setting aside for next semester's textbooks. It was pathetic in comparison to what Helen needed, but it was something. "I want to help," he said. "Oh, honey, no. You've already done so much." "This isn't charity," Ethan said firmly. "This is what friends do for each other." That night, Ethan did something that terrified him. He called his parents. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How much do you and Dad have in savings?" The silence on the other end told him everything.
"Ethan, why are you asking?"
He told them about Helen, about Marcus, about the impossible number hanging over their heads. When he finished, his mother was crying.
"We have about $4,000.
She whispered.
It's for emergencies, for your school if something happens."
"This is an emergency, Mom. Someone's son is dying." "Ethan," his father's voice came on the line, rough with emotion. "That money represents years of sacrifice, every penny." "I know, Dad. I know what I'm asking." Another long silence. Then, "We'll drive up tomorrow with the money." The next morning, as Ethan sat in the hospital waiting room with Helen, he watched her pace back and forth, anxiety radiating from every step. Marcus had taken a turn for the worse during the night, and the doctors were preparing for emergency surgery.
"We're still short,"
Helen whispered.
"Even with your family's money, we're still $3,000 short."
Ethan made a decision that would haunt him for months. He withdrew from all his classes, forfeiting the semester's tuition he'd already paid. It was $3,500, enough to cover the remaining cost and leave a small buffer for Helen's other expenses. When Helen found out what he'd done, she was horrified.
You can't sacrifice your education for me.
She cried.
I won't let you.
It's just one semester, Ethan insisted. I can start again in the spring.
With what money? Ethan, if you drop out now, you might never come back. I've seen it happen to so many bright kids.
But the decision was made. Marcus had his surgery the following Monday. The surgery was a success. Marcus would need months of recovery, but the doctors were optimistic. Ethan visited him in the hospital, finding a young man who looked remarkably like his mother, intelligent eyes. "You're Ethan," Marcus said when they were introduced. "Mom talks about you constantly. She says you're the son she never had." Ethan felt a flush of embarrassment and pride. "She's pretty special." "She is," Marcus agreed. "And she's been worried sick about what you did. Dropping out of school for us. It's temporary." "Is it?" Marcus studied him carefully. "Do you have the money to re-enroll?" Ethan didn't answer, which was answer enough. "My mother has been keeping something from you," Marcus said quietly. "Something important. She made me promise not to tell, but I think you deserve to know. Marcus, don't—" Helen's voice came from the doorway. She'd arrived with coffee for everyone, but her face had gone pale at her son's words. "Mom, he sacrificed his education for us. He deserves the truth." "What truth?" Ethan asked, looking between mother and son. Helen set down the coffee with shaking hands. "Not here. Not like this. What truth?" Ethan repeated, his voice rising slightly. Helen closed her eyes, as if gathering strength. "There's something I need to tell you about who I really am." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus reached over and squeezed his mother's hand encouragingly. "Ethan," Helen said finally, "everything you think you know about me, it's not exactly true."
3 days later, Helen asked Ethan to meet her at an address downtown. It wasn't in the working-class neighborhood where she lived, but in the financial district, in front of a gleaming 40-story building with Morrison Enterprises etched in granite at its base. Ethan stared up at the building, confused. "Helen, what are we doing here?" "Come with me," she said quietly. They entered through the marble lobby, past security guards who nodded respectfully to Helen. Not with the dismissive acknowledgement she received at the university, but with genuine deference. The elevator rose to the 38th floor, opening into a reception area that screamed wealth and power. "Mrs. Morrison," the receptionist said warmly, "everyone's waiting for you in the conference room." Ethan's head snapped toward Helen. "Mrs. Morrison?" Helen, or whoever she really was, took his arm gently. "There's so much you don't understand." The conference room was filled with people in expensive suits, documents spread across a mahogany table that probably cost more than Ethan's annual tuition. At the head of the table sat an elderly man who rose when they entered. "Helen, dear, and this must be Ethan." "Ethan," Helen said, her voice barely steady, "I'd like you to meet my father-in-law, Richard Morrison. And these are the board members of Morrison Enterprises." Ethan felt the world tilt around him. Morrison Enterprises, one of the largest real estate development companies on the East Coast. Their name was on buildings throughout Boston, construction sites, luxury developments. "I don't understand," Ethan said.
Helen guided him to a chair. "My husband, Marcus's father, was Thomas Morrison, Richard's son. When Thomas died in Afghanistan 8 years ago, he left Marcus and me a considerable inheritance." "How considerable?" Ethan asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would shatter everything he thought he knew. "Currently valued at approximately $42 million, Richard Morrison said matter-of-factly. The room spun. Ethan gripped the edge of the table. "$42 million? But you work as a janitor. You live in that apartment. You couldn't afford Marcus's surgery." "That's what I wanted people to think," Helen said softly, "including you." "Why?" The word came out strangled. Helen looked around the room at the board members, then back at Ethan. "Because I needed to know who I really was, and who the people around me really were." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. 8 years ago when Thomas died, I inherited more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be my friend. Everyone had a sob story, a business opportunity, a reason why I should give them money. You've been pretending to be poor for 8 years? Ethan asked, incredulous. Living simply, Helen corrected. The apartment is mine. I own the building, actually. The job is real, though I donate my salary to the maintenance staff's pension fund. I wanted to experience life as an ordinary person, to meet people who would know me for who I am, not what I have. Richard Morrison leaned forward. For 8 years, Helen has been testing everyone who came into her life. Colleagues, neighbors, potential friends. She's been disappointed time and time again. People are kind when they think you have money, Helen said. They're also kind when they think you need their help. But genuine kindness, kindness with no expectation of return, kindness towards someone who can never repay it, that's rare. Ethan's mind reeled. So Marcus's surgery could have been paid for with pocket change, Helen admitted. I own a controlling interest in the hospital where he was treated. Then why? Because I needed to see who you really were, Helen said, turning back to face him. I watched you for months, Ethan. I saw how you treated the cleaning staff, how you shared your coffee with an old janitor, how you sacrificed your own comfort for someone you thought had nothing to offer you in return. She returned to the table and sat across from him. And when my son's life was supposedly in danger, you gave up everything, your education, your future, your family's savings. For me, the room was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. You've been lying to me for months, Ethan said finally. Yes, you let me sacrifice my education, my family's money, for a problem that didn't exist. Yes, you let me think you were poor, struggling, desperate. Yes. Helen's voice was barely a whisper. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I trusted you. And I tested you, Helen said. And you passed, in ways that no one else ever has. I don't want your money, Ethan said, moving toward the door. I know, Helen replied. That's exactly why you're getting it. Ethan stopped with his hand on the door handle. What are you talking about? Richard Morrison cleared his throat. Ethan, Helen has been searching for 8 years for someone worthy of inheriting the Morrison legacy, someone who embodies the values that Thomas held dear, integrity, compassion, selflessness. I don't understand. Helen stood again. My son Marcus is brilliant, but he's never wanted the business. He wants to be a doctor, to help people, not to manage corporate profits. For years, I've been looking for someone who could carry on what Thomas built, but do it with the heart that he would have wanted. She walked to a folder at the far end of the table and withdrew a thick document. This is a revised will, Ethan. In it, I've left the majority of my estate, $35 million, to you. Ethan felt his knees weaken. I won't. You will, Helen said firmly. But not now. This will only take effect after my death, which I hope is many years away. Until then, I want to teach you about the business, about responsibility, about what it means to have this kind of power. Why me? Because in 6 months of knowing me, you never once asked me for anything. Even when you knew I was struggling, you never suggested I look for a better job, or asked if I needed money, or hinted that you might be able to help if only you had more yourself. You simply gave what you had. Richard Morrison nodded approvingly. In 8 years, you're the first person who's shown Helen unconditional kindness, no agenda, no expectation of reciprocity. But there's more, Helen continued. I'm not just giving you money, Ethan. I'm giving you opportunity. Starting immediately, Morrison Enterprises will pay for your education, not just your undergraduate degree, but graduate school, business school, whatever you choose to study. She slid another document across the table. We're also creating the Thomas Morrison Foundation for Educational Opportunity. You'll help me run it. We'll provide scholarships for students like you, brilliant kids whose families can't afford to give them the chances they deserve. Ethan looked down at the papers, the numbers in legal language blurring together. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know about struggle, Helen said. You know about sacrifice. You know what it means to have potential trapped by circumstances. That's more valuable than any business degree. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. I'm offering you the chance to change lives, Ethan. Not just your own, but hundreds, maybe thousands of others. Students who are sitting in cafeterias right now, counting their last $20, wondering if they'll ever make it. Ethan thought about his parents, still driving to Boston to deliver their life savings to a stranger's son. He thought about all the nights he'd gone to bed hungry, all the textbooks he couldn't afford, all the opportunities that had seemed forever out of reach. What happens to you? He asked, and to Marcus. Helen smiled for the first time since entering the building. Marcus will finish medical school, fully funded, of course, and me. I think I'll keep cleaning offices for a while longer. There are still people out there worth meeting, still tests worth running. And if I say no? Then I'll find someone else, but I hope you won't say no, Ethan. I think Thomas would have liked you. I think he would have been proud to have you carry on his name. Ethan looked around the room at the board members, all watching him expectantly. Then he looked at Helen, really looked at her, the woman who had cleaned tables and shared coffee with him, who had told him about her sick son and her impossible dreams. She was still there, underneath the revelation, still the person who had become his friend. I need time to think, he said finally. Of course, Helen replied. Take all the time you need, but remember, this isn't about what you've lost, Ethan. It's about what you've found. 6 months later, Ethan stood in the same cafeteria where he'd first offered Helen coffee. But everything had changed. He was back in school, his tuition paid by the Morrison scholarship he'd helped design. His parents had quit their back-breaking jobs. His father now managed properties for Morrison Enterprises. His mother ran a small business that Morrison had helped her start. The Thomas Morrison Foundation had awarded its first scholarships to 50 students across New England. Ethan had personally interviewed each candidate, looking for the qualities Helen had recognized in him: resilience, kindness, and the determination to succeed despite overwhelming odds. Marcus had recovered completely and was in his second year of medical school. He and Ethan had become close friends, bonded by their shared love for the remarkable woman who had brought them together. You're different now, Marcus observed, joining Ethan at their favorite table. How so? More confident, like you finally believe you deserve to be here. Ethan considered this. I think I'm finally understanding what Helen taught me, which is that kindness isn't about what you have to give. It's about choosing to give what you have, even when it's not enough. Helen approached their table, carrying 3 cups of coffee, a ritual they'd maintained even as their circumstances had changed dramatically. The board meeting went well, she reported, settling into her chair. We approved funding for 3 new after-school programs in underserved communities. Any interesting applicants for the summer internship program? Ethan asked. Actually, yes. There's a young woman from Springfield whose story reminds me of someone I know. Brilliant student, working 3 jobs to pay for community college, takes care of her disabled grandmother. Ethan smiled. Sounds like someone worth meeting. I thought so too. I've scheduled her interview for next week. I was hoping you might conduct it. Me? You have a gift for seeing potential in people, Ethan, and you understand what it means to have that potential overlooked by others. As they talked, Ethan noticed other students in the cafeteria. Some he recognized, Brad and his fraternity brothers, who now volunteered regularly with the foundation. Professor Martinez, who'd become a mentor and advisor to Ethan's educational initiatives. But mostly he noticed the students who reminded him of his former self, the ones with worn clothes and careful spending habits, the ones who ate alone because they couldn't afford to socialize, the ones whose potential was hidden behind financial stress and social insecurity. "I have an idea," Ethan said suddenly. Helen and Marcus looked at him expectantly. "What if we created a mentorship program? Not just scholarships, but pairing successful alumni with current students who are struggling, giving them what you gave me, someone who believes in them." Helen's eyes lit up. Someone who sees them when they feel invisible. Exactly. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You know, Mom, I think you chose the right person." Helen reached across the table and took Ethan's hand. "He chose himself. I just gave him the opportunity to see what was already there." The conversation continued as the cafeteria filled with the lunch crowd. Students rushed past their table, focused on their own concerns, their own struggles and dreams. Most of them had no idea that the quiet conversation happening in the corner would eventually touch their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. But Ethan knew. He understood now that every person in that room had a story, had potential, had the capacity for both kindness and greatness. Helen had taught him to see beyond the surface, to recognize the extraordinary in the ordinary, and now it was his turn to pass that gift forward. 2 years later, Ethan stood at a podium in the main auditorium of Boston University, looking out at an audience of students, faculty, and community members. The annual Morrison Foundation Gala had become one of the most anticipated events on campus, not for its glamour, but for its stories. 2 years ago, Ethan began, I was sitting in the cafeteria of this very building, trying to figure out how to stretch $20 until my next paycheck. I was invisible, one of those students that others step around but never really see. Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. Many of them knew this story now, but they never tired of hearing it. That morning, I made a choice that seemed small at the time. I offered to buy coffee for an elderly janitor who looked like she was having a tough day. I thought I was being kind to her. He paused, finding Helen in the audience. She was sitting with Marcus, both of them beaming with pride. But it turned out she was being kind to me. She was giving me something much more valuable than money. She was giving me the chance to discover who I really was. The applause was warm, genuine. Tonight, we're announcing the expansion of the Morrison Foundation's reach. Next year, we'll be funding scholarships and support programs at 10 universities across the country. We'll be supporting 500 students who, like me, have potential that just needs someone to believe in it. More applause, louder now. But the real announcement I want to make is this. Mrs. Helen Morrison has agreed to step down as primary director of the foundation. A murmur went through the crowd. This was unexpected. After 4 years of teaching me everything she knows about business, about leadership, and about the responsibility that comes with privilege, she's decided it's time for the next generation to take the lead. Ethan looked directly at Helen, his voice thick with emotion. Helen, you saved my life. Not with money, but with belief. You saw something in a struggling student that he couldn't see in himself, and now it's my turn to pass that gift forward. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. When it finally died down, Ethan continued. The Morrison Foundation's mission has always been simple, to find potential where others see problems, to invest in character rather than connections, and to remember that the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't money, it's hope. He gestured to the audience. Look around you tonight. This room is full of Morrison scholars, students who were once where I was, worried about basic survival, wondering if they belonged in places like this. Now they're engineers, teachers, doctors, social workers. They're changing their communities because someone took a chance on them. In the front row, Ethan spotted Sarah Chen, the young woman from Springfield who'd been Helen's recommendation 2 years earlier. She was now a junior studying social work, and she'd just been accepted to graduate school. Next to her sat David Rodriguez, whose family had lost their home when he was in high school, but who was now a semester away from his engineering degree. The truth is, Ethan continued, we're all just one conversation away from changing someone's life, one act of kindness away from discovering something extraordinary, one moment of seeing someone truly away from everything being different. He found his parents in the audience, his father now wearing a suit instead of work clothes, his mother glowing with pride. They'd never imagined their son would be running a foundation, speaking to crowds, changing lives on this scale. So I challenge all of you. Tomorrow morning, look for the invisible people in your life, the custodian, the cafeteria worker, the student sitting alone. See them, really see them. Because you never know, you might be looking at the person who will change the world. You just have to give them the chance. As the applause erupted again, Ethan stepped down from the podium and walked directly to Helen. Without a word, he embraced her, holding her tight as the audience continued their appreciation. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear, "for everything." "Thank you," she whispered back, "for showing me that my test was worth it, that kindness still exists in this world." When they separated, Helen was crying, but this time they were tears of joy. "I have one more surprise," she said, loud enough for nearby people to hear. "Ethan doesn't know this yet, but the board voted yesterday. We're renaming the foundation." Ethan looked at her in confusion. "From now on, it will be called the Ethan Chen Morrison Foundation for Educational Opportunity." Ethan felt his knees go weak. "Helen, I can't." "You can," she said firmly, because it was never about the Morrison name. It was about what that name represents, the belief that every person has value, that every life has potential, and that sometimes all someone needs is for one person to see them truly. As the crowd erupted in celebration around them, Ethan thought about that morning 2 years ago when he'd had $20 and a choice to make. He thought about all the lives that had been changed because of that single moment of deciding to care about someone else, and he realized that Helen had been right all along. The greatest inheritance you can give someone isn't money. It's the knowledge that they matter, that they're seen, and that their life has meaning. In a world that often makes people feel invisible, sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply paying attention. The story of a poor student and a secret heiress had become something much bigger, a reminder that we all have the power to change lives, regardless of our bank account balance. We just have to be brave enough to see the people around us, and kind enough to act on what we see. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of courage, kindness, and the transformative power of truly seeing another person. Ethan's story reminds us that the most valuable things we can give each other aren't material, they're hope, belief, and the recognition that every life has immeasurable worth. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet heroes in your own life, please like, share, and subscribe to Stories Worth Telling. We believe in the power of storytelling to change hearts, minds, and communities, one story at a time. Remember, you never know whose life you might change with a simple act of kindness. The person next to you might be exactly who you're meant to help or who's meant to help you. Stay open, stay kind, and keep believing in the magic of human connection. Until next time, take care, and remember that your story matters too.